Test 1 2 3. Everybody recording. The waves are going up and down. All right, excellent. All right, hello again, Izdihar. It is very, very nice to have you back.
Yeah, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Howdy.
You were in the running for the most requested repeat guest, and you're coming for a McLeod spot, just so you know. So hold on, there's something that you want to tell us before we start recording, before I had my pneumonia coughing fit.
Yeah. So last month, back in September, I was in Copenhagen and I got to hang out with Torkel Lawson, who you had as a guest. Yeah, he's a legend, amazing, right? Legendary communist bank robber. Amazing man. He served me coffee on a rooftop. It was beautiful.
Oh my God.
Wow.
Okay. Why are you flexing so hard on this? Did you also go? Did you also take out Parenti for like a picnic? What else did you do?
No. But it's when you meet like a legend like that, it's kind of a big deal. So I was posturing a bit and tried to be on his level, and I'm like, hey, we've been on the same podcast, and he asked me, oh, what podcast? And I said, Deprogram, and he had no idea what I was talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Man, poor guy. I remember we asked him to, like, when I emailed him so he can record, he was very, very nice. He was like, oh, you know what? I'm going to get a new pair of headphones specifically to record with you guys.
Aww.
So that I have good audio. And then he couldn't figure out how to set them up. So he just used his computer fucking mic. And that's why the episode is so... What JT did.
Sounds like he's in a tin can.
Yeah.
Yeah,
JT,
he's
the
much
miracle
easier.
worker.
He's much easier to understand in person. So,
what
no,
were the
not to be
circumstances
mean,
that led up to that?
I was in Copenhagen and I just reached out to him and asked if he wanted to meet up. He never even questioned who I was until like after we hung out for 2.5 hours. And then
That's
like at
awesome.
the end, he's like, by the way, like, who do we know? And I'm like, we don't know. I don't think we know anyone. Like in common, like seriously. I was
in prison with one of your comrades. I didn't run guns to Vietnam.
But it was like a life-changing conversation. I can't quite explain. It was so nice to talk to someone so just such a legend who's done so much and has so much wonderful insight, and to be able to talk one-on-one with someone on like their level, I guess, is a big deal. And and he never even, I could have been like, any sort of number of dubious agencies, and he never even questioned anything until the end.
I mean, the guy's been in prison for like 15 years before he came out. I think he's like, what worse can they do?
Yeah.
He's banned from entering the U.S. He can't even come to the U.S.
Honestly, that's a blessing.
I was going to say, no huge loss there, honestly.
Right. No, he was proud of it.
He's going to miss out on the homophobic chicken. Sorry, go.
Yeah, true.
But yeah, I thought I'd let you know. I'm so sorry. It seems like he does a lot of appearances. Like if anyone asks to speak with him or hang out, he just says yes to everyone. So
that's so cool. What a guy. I love that. How old is he now? He's in his 70s?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah,
he rode a bike. He's fine.
Nice.
Yeah, but those Nordics, they all live long.
Yeah.
His what's it called? Global Perspective. I think is his newest book still. I think, but all his books are fantastic. Genuinely, I highly recommend to anybody listening to check his work out. Very interesting contemporary Marxist theory.
You might run into his articles doing any sort of research too. I always run into him surprisingly, like in articles that I access. So.
Or you might run into him in person in Copenhagen, and he might talk to you.
Yeah, you might run into him in Copenhagen.
Exactly right. Serve you coffee on a roof. Was the coffee good?
It was all right. It was just
it was all right. Okay. Okay.
Can't be a perfect experience, yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. Reminds me of the people who, who go out and take Parenti for like cafe breaks and walks. Those people are doing God's work. And then they go back over to his, and then it's so cute. And then he just goes through the stuff that he has, the different like historical bits and pieces and photos that he taken and whatnot. So cute. He has a biography that he wrote many years ago about him like growing up as an Italian American, blah blah, and, on the East Coast all those fucking decades ago. It'd be interesting to read. It's such a shame that we can't get him on.
Yeah.
Pros and Round Table, I remember at the time tried to get him on, but he was already kind of too far gone for it, sadly. I think he deserves just to rest now.
Yeah, he's made his contributions. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
There's another... Sorry, go on, JT.
No, I was just going to say, I'm trying to think if I've met anybody cool in my life. Let's see. No, I don't think I have. I met Tiger Woods when I was like 7 or something because my dad worked at Pfizer at the time, and they were given like, hey, you guys want to go to the Masters or whatever the golf thing is? I don't know golf. And then we just met Tiger Woods at one point. Apparently, I don't know if like my dad was important at that point, and it's like, hey, come hang out with the president and Tiger Woods and whatever. It's like, but yeah. So I guess that's my claim to fame.
I don't think I've met anybody of that type. No, I remember I met a very long time ago, and I didn't appreciate the gravity of it. I met a Eastern European partisan, a woman who was a sniper. Yeah, and I met her during some sort of history celebration thing. But it was around Victory Day, but they weren't really on because this was in one of the currently anti-communist countries.
Yeah.
But she proudly showed up in her very clearly Soviet partisan with all her Soviet medals.
So cool.
And she was ancient. This woman, she was in her late 80s, and we're talking almost like 20 years ago now, or no, 15 years ago. And she was standing on crutches. I remember with her uniform, and it was the pants bit were like it was a skirt. It wasn't a pants, so it was more of a ceremonial one. But the top one was the original one that she was talking about. And I remember I at the time I didn't realize the gravity of meeting such a hero in the flesh.
Yeah.
She looks like such a nice old granny.
Where was she from?
She's from.
Oh, okay.
Very, very nice old lady. But anyways, yeah, that's the only famous person I met. Otherwise, hold on, there's somebody that you met or somebody. You are a frequent visitor to the world-renowned Lenin statue in is it Seattle?
Yeah, because I live. People come and visit me whenever anyone's in Seattle. Like any communist on the internet who comes to Seattle, always reaches out to me, and I show them all the spots. So you can always reach out to me as well. Just don't be a creep.
She's armed.
Yeah.
So
yeah. But no, the Lenin statue, it's huge. And there's a Lenin statue in Copenhagen. That's one of the reasons I went. But he's locked away in a courtyard in the Workers' Museum, which is really like a social democrat museum. They were really weird about me being there.
Well, social democrats one step away from being
Yeah.
Oh my god, absolute cringe.
But so there's a Lenin statue in Copenhagen in this museum, and he's hidden out in this tiny courtyard that you only see if you go and use the restrooms in the gift shop. And there's like this abysmal little plaque calling him dubious things, and apparently you're supposed to be able to go out there and see him, but it was locked, and I had to get someone to specially open it for me, and they were like all defensive about it. So and Copenhagen, Lenin's been there, he has history there, he lived there for like 2 months, and things happened, right? And yet they're slowly hiding their history. Yet here in Seattle we have like various monuments and such to the Soviet Union, and we have a lot less connection in that regard.
Isn't there some like a park or something?
Tashkent
like
Park,
Soviet
yes.
French... Yeah.
Yep. Tashkent Park. It's Seattle was the first U.S. sister city to a Soviet city, and so in the 70s, like the mayor of Seattle and mayor of Tashkent made this friendship happen. It actually was built through corruption, because the first attempt to make it make them sister cities and have a park in each city was denied, and so they had to go the back way and convince people and stuff.
I love it.
We don't have anything like that in Texas, I'm afraid to say.
You might have something. It's a big state.
We have the closest we have is like Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard or something like that.
You have a statue to General Lee, and that's all you need.
Oh yeah.
We have our share of problematic statues and things named after people, etc.
Exactly.
But we've got good Mexican food.
Yeah, I mean, sure. That absolves it, I guess.
Thanks for consoling me, guys.
The summer heat on the Dr. Pepper as the ice melts, that's what makes it better.
Oh, yeah.
Or sun tea.
You're going to make me relapse.
Yeah, no, I don't want to.
The clinking of the ice. Oh, no.
I say, if everything goes to shit and, Texas is no longer safe for you, I'm sure Seattle will become a safe haven for many people of our kind.
Yeah.
Hey, knowing JT, he's gonna end up fleeing to you gulping on my part.
Yeah.
My God, he's gonna go become his true origin story will emerge. He'll be Chepmanovich.
Yes.
Afterwards.
I have to flee DeSantis's death squads.
Oh God.
Anti-woke death squads.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the program. A secondary excuse for my voice, aside from the usual lack of you going around to pep me up. The fuck is the word? Pep me up. Exactly right. Is the pneumonia that I'll probably develop by the next episode. That's why I keep missing. That's why I keep missing these fucking things. Oh Lord. Anyways, hello. Yes, welcome back to the program. Today we have a fantastic guest, someone who has been on the podcast before. You should really listen to the previous episode with them. And that is Lady Izdihar, who is a absolutely fantastic content creator, historian, I guess analyst you could even put if you follow her Twitter, but generally an all around very fun and great and interesting person. Please, Izdihar, introduce yourself. Let people know who you are, what you do, and then we can enter into the topic.
Yeah. Wait, is that all it takes to be an analyst? Just to post on Twitter about stuff that's going on? All right.
That's my
what?
resume.
It's you're more qualified than the people who advise the American government, honestly.
Oh, God. Well, anyways, hi, assalamu alaikum. My name is Izdihar, and I go by Lady Izdihar on most places on the internet. And yeah, I'm a Soviet historian or independent historical researcher, if you take offense to me calling myself a historian. And yeah, I'm so happy to be back. I missed you guys, except I never met JT before, but I missed him then, and I see him. I would have, yes. And we all dearly miss Yugopnik, who is
Sadly, he's in the skies. He's not dead. Him. No, don't worry. He's soaring like a bird
in an airplane. He's not dead. He's not dead. Yeah.
Alhamdulillah.
Inshallah.
Inshallah, exactly. Right. Yes, today's general topic is one that is a bit more loosey-goosey than our usual dedicated topics. So that's just because of the way of the recent covering of news. I think everybody's familiar with what's been said about what's going on in Palestine and whatnot. And that will have its own dedicated episode down the line. But much more importantly is something that we've seen that always comes up in anti-colonial movements of sorts, which is the use and politicization of women through this quasi-Orientalist lens. And it's almost exclusively used during anti-colonial movements. For example, Palestine, or what happened through the various movements in Africa, from Algeria down to South Africa. And this time it's been incredibly blatant. This also kind of intersects with the dehumanization of non-white men and all the weird intersections of racism towards that. But before we enter into this, could you please let people know where they can find you so that they can find you?
Yeah. So you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, or whatever you call it now, and YouTube under Lady Izdihar, and on TikTok as the Lady Izdihar. I also have like a Patreon and such if you want to support me, and I also have a website where I scan my growing collection of historical documents so people can have free access to all sorts of perspectives about the Soviet Union, those that are positive. I should mention that's what I do. I take a positive spin on Soviet history. I'm really big on combating the misunderstood and the misrepresented, and highlighting lesser known and complicated topics like religion, women, so on and so forth in the Soviet Union.
A thankless job, honestly.
Yeah.
It's something.
Yeah, I can imagine. If you see the stuff that people send this poor woman, my God. All the links will be in the below in the description, whatever the thing is called. The floor is yours.
Right. So I guess what brought you to bring me on as a person talking about this is because like on October 8th, I made a tweet that did, I guess it did pretty well. It made its rounds. It got, a lot of people saw it, where I was so fed up because all those 2 days, because only October 8th, right, that I posted this, all I would see in my timeline on Twitter, on Instagram, on TikTok, everything was just women's bodies, and like women's bodies with horrific accusations of what happened to them, and the most like disgusting, vile words towards Palestinian men. And it got to me because it's something I'm not unfamiliar with. It's something that we see over and over again. And so I said this. I said, I'm so disgusted how accusations of rape and violence against women is weaponized in conflict media. The historical reality of sexual assault in war is a well-known phenomenon perpetrated by every army you could think of. But the assertion that certain kinds of people do it, racializing it, making it a cultural thing, using that as your tool for us versus them, how can people so casually weaponize such horrors for their narrative? And it's evident, it's obvious, who's accused and whose assault is overlooked or highlighted in the media.
Yeah, beautifully said. Could you please tell our audience what very reasonable and level-headed response you got to this tweet?
Well, there's one person who photoshopped me being beheaded by Hamas, and that was fun. Oh my God. In fact, whoever did this uses like the same editing methods and pictures that someone who routinely sends me pictures of their penis against a screen of a photo of me. So I know it's the same guy who does that because he used the same photos. And so that's a whole nother layer of irony there. People were wishing assault upon me. People were, all the things that happen
trash.
when you... I thought I sounded very reasonable.
Yeah.
That's the thing is, you feel crazy when you're saying like seemingly reasonable things, but apparently not.
Yeah, it's kind of like the beheaded babies thing. It's like you're talking about something that is unbelievably horrific, like the most terrible thing you can imagine. And then when it turns out that was not true, then you've got these people just frothing at the mouth like they were wanting this to actually be true just because it fits their priors, their preconceived notions. And it's a very strange, unhealthy derangement.
Right. And I had a friend point out that he noticed it was mostly white men who were really sharing this and sharing images of the women that were, supposedly potentially raped. And it's like that's a whole nother layer of why is it that it's mostly men, white men, who are so giddy to talk about the abuse of women and put that, the perpetrators of their abuse onto a specific section of society.
Why do you think that is? I think, actually, it's a very weird question. Let's go it poll here. Because you two, I would assume, identify with that characteristic. Not glorifying violence against women, but both being white.
Yeah, we're both white.
Yeah. Of some description. Why do you think that is?
Well, you go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead, white man. Come on.
Yeah,
be confident.
Let me take my God-given place as the first one to answer. So as I think a lot of white men have a main character complex, but as well as a kind of, there are a bunch of complexes kind of wrapped up there. So you've got obviously the white savior complex, the main character complex, but also I think I don't like to go out of my way to say, there's a lot of internalized misogyny among all men and stuff like that because, that's an overgeneralization. But I think that is part of a lot of it. Like a lot of the loudest commentators online, especially among, white American men, is kind of rooted in this feeling that they are superior to women and that women should be, if they don't outright have disdain for the women, then they are objects to be protected, not out of kindness, but out of ownership. And so perhaps that is part of it. But also, I think a big part of it is just trying to win points for your side online while looking like a good person. Like, oh, I care deeply about these women that have been abused, when clearly that is not the case most of the time.
Right. I mean, that's all of Twitter, basically, right? That's all of being an analyst online is the sort of egotistical virtue signaling so that you are, ego plays a lot in it for sure. I mean, I think it kind of goes along with all the work that I do in trying to tell a certain side of history and misspell, misinformation. It's just, I think a lot of it is projection, because a lot of the accusations that we see about what's happening to these women potentially are the same exact acts of violence that were done to Palestinian women, like recorded in memoirs in 1948. Right? We see accounts of women being raped. We see accounts of I read one this morning about a baby being burned back in 1948 as well. Yeah. And it's like these are the same things that are being accused by Hamas, whatever you want to, they're pinning it on, right? The average Palestinian more likely is what they're trying to say it is. And then also we see the same thing happening in our own armies and militaries, right? We have countless stories of sexual assault and rape by American military members, be it in Vietnam and the Philippines, in Germany during World War II, in France during World War II. We have so many stories. It's like, it's almost as if we're projecting what we've already done and know what we've done onto somebody else. And as I said, it's a projection onto what we already do and know that we do, or maybe even want to do. Like maybe we talked about the ego. Maybe it's that if these men see women as objects, someone else got to touch their object when normally they would do it, you know?
Yeah, very beautifully put. I can't really comment from that because I'm not from that. Like I'm looking into it because a lot of these people also are particularly American or raised in the American context, and that's, I think, the biggest thing that I wouldn't be able to relate to. But the strange thing is that it seems for a lot of people, this violence against just a dehumanization of an entire race of people, all this kind of stuff, as well as the sick use of violence against one particular gender, is used only to kind of reinforce one's own biases. And again, like JC said, just to win points, right? You never cared about how, for example, like what's it called, 40%, the 40% of police, blah blah, like that meme, right? You don't care about the amount of violence that happens in your own country, right? In fact, some people may even make like throwaway jokes about it. But when you see it in another way, in a particular context that's fed to you in a particular way, then all of a sudden you have like some performative moral outrage that's usually covered with some thin veneer of racism. Supposing that, by the way, that the thing that you're being fed is even true, the vast majority, if not, I dare I say all, essentially, that has been reported on that particular the events that are taking place, have been nonsense, from the babies thing to all the rest of it. But sorry, we completely shifted from. I want to see JT squabble over the white people question, so I completely derailed your point. Izdihar, please go on.
I mean, I guess it's all the classic us versus them. Demonize the potential enemy as much as you can, and what's more horrific than sexual assault, really? And like I guess, like, we should preface this by saying, like, this is a serious matter. Like, we're not trying to diminish someone's experience if they have experienced assault. Like, who's to say? Like, in war zone, in war, in conflict, it happens. It's documented, and it happens in every war and every conflict. So we're not trying to say that, like, haha, it doesn't happen, or like, fuck these people, especially if there is a credible experience. It's just, we know and we see how it's being used and manipulated, and how cruel is it that you use one of the most heinous acts forced upon someone, men and women, to make a point. Like, it's yeah, I guess there's really no rules, but you would think that you wouldn't stoop that low, right?
No, genuinely. And that's kind of what makes the discussion even more difficult, because beyond just that point, then you even doubt the sincerity of these people. It gets irritating. But I think there's also a lot of just an issue of being chronically online.
Yeah.
No, for these, for when you see these opinions, because when you talk to regular people, or when you discuss within your own organizations or even your own family and workplaces and whatnot, if these conversations even come up, which they should, you encounter much more sober, I would assume, perspectives.
Right. Or like less just horrific. Like I have one tweet that I saved where it's like, oh, they raped women until their pelvises broke.
Jesus.
Like that's such a extreme visual, and like, why would you go that far on something that you don't even have like evidence for? It's clearly meant to just outrage people. They raped women until their pelvises broke. They tied babies to their mothers and burned them alive. They made a 90-year-old Holocaust survivor kneel and executed them, which is like, given Israel's track record to how they treat Holocaust survivors, how most of them live in poverty. Like, I read a quote the other day. What was it? That like, oh, the Holocaust survivors are weak. We're not going to let that happen to us. Like, that's so, like, it's all projection, right? Like, it's really, no sane person, I think, can read this and think that there isn't something more sinister going on here. There's also like the hilarious post that Amy Schumer made on Twitter with like
Oh yeah.
the fake Palestinian protest and like the little posters that they're holding, like I love Hamas, Gazans rape Jewish girls only in self-defense, beheading is resistance. I kind of like that one though. Yeah, so was it stab Jews for Allah? Like it's really fucked up, but it's like no, it's a drawing because no one's saying this,
right.
no one's doing this. It's all fabricated, but it's people feel so emboldened to these false realities that they make full ass public posts about it. And there's unstable, unwell, and impressionable people who eat it up and then commit horrible crimes. Just last night there was another Muslim woman who was stabbed to death in the United States. In Texas, actually, I think it was.
Yeah, it was.
So it's like it has real world consequences, not just in the genocide in Palestine, but all over the world. You make Muslims, and Muslim men especially, or Arab men, which people can't tell the difference of, so they're like, oh. And then real people suffer because of it everywhere in the world.
Yeah, I mean, there are actual tangible consequences to this stuff. I mean, we've seen it most recently with this, but then a few months ago, it was the China scare stuff. Like, oh, they're making super soldiers. Oh, they're dating their spies. They've got spy police stations in the United States, and so you had all these horrific attacks on people of Asian descent. Doesn't matter if they're Chinese. It's just to the average American, anybody who looks Asian is the enemy now. So, and then we saw it in the lead up to the quote unquote war on terror, like in the aftermath of 9/11. It's the same
Where
exact
Sikh people
thing.
were being attacked.
Oh my God.
The ridiculousness of it. I think the first man, I believe, somebody could correct him probably, but I believe the first man that was murdered specifically as like quote unquote revenge for 9/11 quote unquote was a Sikh man waiting for the New York subway or something. And some crazy. It's really sad, but what makes it like almost funny, it isn't funny, but what makes it almost funny is that this guy's caricature of what Muslims are is that they all must have a turban. So he goes after the first guy that he sees with a turban, despite the fact that, oh my God, and you have to, the ignorance with the hatred combined is so potent.
Yeah, I saw that the Sikh coalition had to come out with a statement after the young boy was stabbed 2 weeks ago, the young Muslim boy, Palestinian American boy that was stabbed by his landlord. The Sikh coalition had to come out and make statements because every time there's a rise in Muslim hate crimes, the Sikh population has to raise their awareness as well.
Genuinely,
it's one thing you expect ignorant, hateful, mean-spirited, ahistorical posts from people online, on Twitter. That's what the internet does best. But when we see, wall-to-wall coverage mindlessly parroting either debunked claims or dehumanizing rhetoric, as we've seen in this instance and many times before, that's when it becomes really dangerous because you have quote-unquote normal people consuming these lies or this slander, this rhetoric, whatever, internalizing it and coming to view an entire group of people as subhuman savages, which then, of course, accelerates the decline into these hate crimes or all these whatever other tragedies happen to befall normal people just living their lives. And that is where the media in the West and the United States in particular has really failed. And that's and maybe that's, you can be conspiratorial and say, oh, maybe it's intentional. Or you can say maybe it's just, a morally bankrupt thing. This is the easy way to do it. You just parrot the claims that you're fed. Nobody actually gives a shit about their job at these stations, and there are consequences that they don't care about. So very disheartening, to say the least.
Right, and it's not just a failure in the kind of propaganda that we're fed, but it's a failure of our education system. It has multiple layers because why are they so susceptible to believing these things? Because we don't learn anything about other religions in other parts of the world in the United States. Mandatory education doesn't usually cover world geography and religion, at least not to an extent where you can differentiate what or where someone is. So it's beyond just the propagandized, us versus them, demonize the enemy. It starts even as children in our lack of education.
Yeah, and it's alarming. I mean, here in Texas, to give you guys an anecdote, there are new textbooks in certain school districts in Texas that basically just say, and then the Native Americans left, essentially. So they're completely erasing the actual history of genocide that took place here. And so people wonder, why Americans seem so ignorant is because, like you said, it starts, at the very youngest forms of education. Yeah, you don't even know what to say at some point. It's like every single thing is like it's stacked against the average person actually grappling with what the world looks like, actually having an understanding of history or of geography or of religion or even like social science, little things that all adds up to this perfect storm of ignorance that enables not only individual hate crimes and things like this, but also support for the machine that causes mass suffering around the world.
Right. And it's almost like we're at the tip of this mass, what do you call it, a storm, right? Because it's beyond, years and years of dehumanizing whichever enemy the United States has. I deal with, mostly like Soviet history and like the Red Scare, and that had major consequences in that, like, in every field, in education and the sciences, like when you had mass firings of professors and scientists who even showed a little bit of sympathy towards communism or the Soviet Union, and now you still have a lasting effect, right? Because now you have old people in these institutions who demonize or are afraid to mention any sort of positive about these things, and then who's hired. It goes on, and so it's really a long-standing issue that we have in our education and our propaganda that all leads to this. And it's all these people being stabbed to death just sitting on a bench on a phone, as this woman was just yesterday. It's all just this long line of propaganda and ignorance and purposeful dismissal of people with open views. Sorry, it's depressing. I know.
No, it's not. It's like these are things that people need to think about, because it's as fun as it is to be in the clouds with a theory, and of course even in the dregs with organizational work, if you're taking part in that, which everybody should be doing at least on some event. If you're not involved in your local union, for example, and you should be in something, politics determines every aspect of your life, so it's silly to not be at least playing some part in it yourself. On at least some level. But that being said, though, these things are a sort of like quote unquote secondary analysis, because they're if you're not directly affected by them, then you can very quickly get blindsided by all the other stuff that you're experiencing. And that's sometimes what you see with a lot of some reactions of, like, let's say European nations to what's going on in Palestine, where instead of realizing the humanity in the correct alignment, they let out lukewarm statements, or they just stay quiet, or they do the batshit crazy thing, which is completely side with the settler colonial entity. Despite the fact that if you were to, like, actually, even the most pro-settler colonial, country in Europe, if you were to go there and ask everyday people about what's happening, and you were to show them the footage and show them what's actually happening on the ground, they would at least go towards the middle, if not flip entirely. And this is something that, again, if you don't kind of harp on it, sad to say, if you don't make people depressed about this, then the change that's required will not take place.
Yeah. That's why I posted that. I posted a long. I went back and forth.
Yeah, it was fantastic
for like, I don't know, a couple of weeks. Like I've just been saving dozens of clips of just heinous crimes against the Palestinian people, because I know I'm followed by a lot of new lefties and liberals that aren't really shown the reality of the situation. They hear the Israeli side, they see it on the news, and that's about it. Israel's defending itself. That's their perspective. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna blast them with this post. And luckily it's gotten some traction. I think a lot of people have seen it, and hopefully some people have changed their minds. But that is what you need to do. Like, most people just aren't aware of this stuff, and you need to present them with it. They need to see actual human beings rather than just like rhetorical devices. Like the amount of footage of children being pulled from rubble, or like there's a son who is badly injured comforting his father who was crying next to him by the stretcher, and things like that. It's like, man, just the depth of depravity you would need to sink to look at that and say, no, I'm going to keep my perspective intact. I'm going to turn away from this. To me, that is unconscionable. And thankfully, I think the tide is turning. Around the world, we've seen massive solidarity marches for Palestine, and Israel continues to lose friends left and right. obviously we're still up against a large challenge because the United States is its largest benefactor, and that support's not going anywhere. But yeah, on an individual level, confronting people with actual footage or, the reality of the situation can sometimes do some good.
No, I fear that there's people who are becoming numb to it, right? Like, and it's sad. Like, how many times do Palestinians have to show they're dead and dying to get sympathy? When all it takes is one or two photos of a person when they're still alive, when they're still healthy, in a little text saying this person may or may not be captured by Hamas, and they immediately get so much love and support and belief, but Palestinians have to showcase their dead, right? Like the press conference amongst all the dead bodies that they had, and still there's people who don't care. It's wild that they have to showcase their suffering to be taken seriously as much of the world becomes numb to it. But yeah, you're right. I think young people are definitely turning their heads. Like, they're not afraid anymore of like being let go of their jobs or their school. There's definitely a new generation of people who don't fear the same sort of tactics that, for instance, was utilized in the Second Red Scare.
Exactly right. I think it's also there's a social acceptance of being like this general trend of not I wouldn't say like growing left wing trend. Like, a lot of people have like sock dem beliefs, more or less, for example, in the US. But at the very least, there is a social acceptance of being, for example, hey, maybe we should listen to the Palestinian side. Or if you were to go like 20 years back, this was a non-existent thing. Comparatively.
But I did want to read something that was really interesting by the Interim Revolutionary Feminist Committee. I posted a link to that. Is that okay if I go into that?
Go right ahead. Yeah, go right ahead.
Okay, so this organization, the Interim Revolutionary Feminist Committee, published a piece on October 9th titled Tear Feminism Out of the Hands of the Colonizer, Our Statement Debunking the Claims of Mass Rape Used to Siphon Off Support from the Palestinian Resistance. And there are a lot of really enlightening things, and I highly recommend people go and read the whole thing. But this is what they said. They said, Zionist media sources such as the Times of Israel have stated that there is no conclusive evidence that even a single case of rape or sexual assault has occurred at the hands of the Palestinian freedom fighters, much less that it has occurred en masse. In an article posted on October 8th, they reported that such cases are only suspected. They state that these concerns of sexual assault stem from two sources. One, a video of woman with blood on her shorts, and two, an image of a woman lying in a truck. While images coming from a war zone are shocking for mostly everyone, absolutely none of the videos released show any conclusive evidence, right? And they raised the question, why? Like, why are they doing this? This is what we're talking about. Why are they doing this? And it's in order to organize masses of people into their narrative that Palestinian freedom fighters are evil, monstrous terrorists, right? Of course, the classic us versus them. And like, these unsubstantiated claims really overshadow the history of sexual violence imposed on Palestinians and others by the Zionist entity. I mean, just in July of 2023, Israel came under criticism for passing a law that allowed Jewish settlers to have a lesser punishment for rape, sexual assault, and harassment towards Palestinian citizens.
Wow.
Multiple news headlines in the past 10 years calling out Israel for their growing issue of being a safe haven for pedophiles and sexual predators. And in 2023, the head of Megan for Jewish Communities, an Israeli NGO that tracks sexual predators, revealed that there were about 100 rabbis, teachers, and other figures who have been accused, charged, or convicted of sexual abuse overseas that finding refuge in Israel. I know there's a mapping project of this as well. And so this article that I highlight, they give many, many examples of assault towards Palestinians, which is quite heavy. But they go on to mention how sex crimes like this are not just limited to Palestinian women. In 2010, a 15-year-old Palestinian boy came forward stating that Israeli occupation forces attached a car starter cable to his penis and threatened that he won't be able to have children once they're done with him. And this is just one story. There's many accounts of torture. And a report by the organization Save the Children said that in 2023, they found that 86% of Palestinian children detained by the occupation are beaten, 69% are strip searched, 42% injured at the point of arrest, and many face violence in a sexual nature, such as being touched, hit in the genitals, before being placed in small cages. So it's like a known and documented, even their own NGOs document like these sorts of sex crimes. And yet we're so quick to believe that it's just a Hamas thing, a Muslim man thing, an Arab thing. Yet the overwhelming evidence and studies done by their own NGOs even show these realities. And like as a Muslim woman who like covers herself, I can only imagine like the psychological and religious aspect to it, where they're forcing Palestinian women to strip in front of who, for how long, why, and a lot of it is probably very much rooted into not just a dehumanization, but the disrespect for instance, the choice to cover or something.
And this is something that I found very not painful, but irritating to see that it completely lacked from any sort of nuance in this conversation, which is the extensive examples of the attempts of that illegal military occupation in harassing Palestinian women, in sexually assaulting Palestinian women, and doing far worse to girls as young as I don't even want to say it. Like it's a ridiculous thing to all of a sudden, like, it's so two-faced, because you clearly don't care. This is your attempt to try to dehumanize a population undergoing some sort of anti-colonial struggle at the moment. These people have never once cared truly about women or their safety or whatnot. They're only using this as a modality or an outlet for their own racism, to be like, look at these savages. They point to them, look at these savages. But meanwhile, when the other side that they're supporting has done far more, like to a ridiculous amount. I'm sure all of us have seen the video of that elderly man who was an Israeli soldier during the 48, during the Nakba, when Palestinians were expelled or murdered, essentially, for the first time. And he's gleefully talking about him sexually harassing, and not sexually, he's gleefully talking about raping women. Right? Yeah. It's just the disgust of this, just how two-faced it is, and how and this is something that's permeated this entire conversation. You have people who are the most the typical fucking Andrew Tate kind of guys. Not even like that. That's even more like a meme than anything else. You know what kind? The fascist person, the fascist archetype of what a man's supposed to be and what he believes are the connections between a man and a woman, the relations between the two. These types coming out with these sort of arguments is just so disingenuous. That's the word I'm fucking looking for. Something that is very interesting related to this is that, of course, this is not the first time in history. But we saw a very big example of this going back to World War II in particular. Could you please go a little bit into that, since it's closer to your field of specialty?
Right. Really, what I know most about is the the propaganda against the Soviets, right? And I think all of us are quite familiar. Oh, apologies, my cat is batting at my headphone.
It's completely wire. Fine. Right. That's her blessing this episode. It's fine.
Yeah. So we're all quite familiar with claims of like the Soviets raping German women. Like there's been so much in the English language produced talking about like the rape of Berlin and Soviet soldiers being depicted as these like horrific monsters. And again, it's interesting because I feel like anyone who studies history, especially military history and war and like the social study around that, is quite aware that every single war and every single army unfortunately utilizes rape. Be that as a purposeful tactic of dehumanization and taking what you want, be that the psychological, sociological aspect of a soldier on their break or like their break in humanity doing what they're doing, or maybe just the psychological aspect of being ordered to do so as a actual tactic, right? But it's something that every army has done, and it's a horrible thing. And to like try and pinpoint and say only one kind of army or person does it is just really disingenuous to the, very well documented historical fact. And some interesting studies have come out in the past 10 years trying to shed light on the fact that while the Soviets are always heralded as these rapists, that really the American and Canadian even armies were very well documented in raping German and French women. And a lot of these new findings actually come out of archives from churches who were documenting these sorts of crimes after the war ended, which is really, really interesting. Let me see if I can find. And what's funny is when you look at these sorts of articles, even the way that they're described is kind of messed up, because even Let me see if I can find the title here. Oh, yeah. So one of these is called "Were the Americans as Bad as the Soviets?" Right? And the article is just talking about the assault perpetrated by Americans. But even just to talk about this entire topic, they have to put the Soviets in there, which is very, very telling, right? So it's believed that members of the U.S. military raped as many as 190,000 German women by the time West Germany regained sovereignty in 1955, with most of the assaults taking place in the months immediately following the U.S. invasion of Nazi Germany. The author bases her claims in large part on reports kept by Bavarian priests in the summer of 1945.
Wow.
Yeah, and they go into great detail about what exactly happened. And then there's a similar study done in France, and some of the quotes from this were really interesting. There's even a New York Times article, "The Dark Side of Liberation" is what this article is called, and you can read it on the New York Times. So it says, "The soldiers who landed in Normandy on D-Day were greeted as liberators, but by the time American GIs were headed back home in late 1940, many French citizens viewed them in a very different light." Let's see, in the port city of Le Havre, is French name, the mayor was bombarded with letters from angry residents complaining about drunkenness, jeep accidents, and sexual assault, a regime of terror, as one put it, imposed by bandits in uniform. And these are Americans. What Soldiers Do, Sex in the American GI in World War II, France, is a book written by historian Mary Louise Roberts, which talks about all of this. Yeah, so she draws from American military records, wartime propaganda, and other sources to advance a provocative argument that the liberation of France was sold to soldiers not as a battle for freedom, but as an erotic adventure among oversexed French women, stirring up a tsunami of male lust that a battered and mistreated population often saw as a second assault on its sovereignty and dignity. So I just think it's really interesting that we talk so much about, like, the assault and horrific activities done by whoever is perceived as the enemy of the United States at that time, when in reality, it's often very much so projection, because now all these studies are coming out and books and records are being dug up of how bad the Americans were. And we never hear a single word about that.
And just sorry, because the liberal in the wall is clawing, and I hear voices. But essentially, this is not to negate or reduce the gravity of sexual assault carried out by armies of whatever stripe. It's always bad when it happens.
Yeah.
All of this is not a good thing. The point that we're trying to highlight is that the use and highlighting of one particular group as the archetype of barbarism for carrying this out, despite the fact that they didn't really do it anymore, or probably actually to a lesser extent than the other side, which was held as the paragon of freedom and all the other bullshit. It's all part of ideology, and it's ideology that people are taught from a very young age and goes down very easy, because it's part and parcel of all the other shit. It's like communism, the food, the Soviets had no freedoms, they raped women, but like, it's the bullet points, and that's why it's ideology is not something that you tear down a day, nor is it something that's built up over one single foundation. They have 1,000 arguments to try to, all of them misplaced or misrepresented, in order to create this straw man that they push on to everybody in fear that the profits and power and privilege of the propertied will be affected, right? And that's why it's just a reorienting of the perspective, right? We're not taking away from the negativity of the thing that we're discussing.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
Right, yeah. So, like, I mean, the what Soviets did is very well documented, and there's even like accounts of people talking on camera, talking about this stuff. So it's not that, like, it didn't happen. The thing that we need to remember is, why is it that certain accounts from certain armies and certain, victims, why are certain ones translated into English and mass produced and published? Whereas it took how many years for these new findings from France and Germany to finally be written about and published about? So it's always something to keep in mind, is why is this being translated for me, and why is this being pushed towards me? And, of course, we have, like, the Red Scare to thank for a lot of that, but whoever is the current quote-unquote enemy of the West, whatever is negative about what they've done is going to be highlighted, translated, and mass-produced, and perspectives that fit that narrative are going to be more so pushed towards you. And, maybe hopefully it won't take so many years to, hear more of the reality of what's going on right now on all sides. But, we know it's a fact of history that we're not going to be getting all of the narratives because of which narratives are popular and want to be pushed. I mean, there's this really famous picture. I think anytime anyone talks about the rape of Berlin, there's this this Polish propaganda poster of like this Soviet soldier in like a Budanovka, like groping a woman in a white dress. And it says like, do you want to allow this to happen to your women and girls? Defend yourself against Bolshevism with all your might. And it's interesting because I've seen that picture so many times. Like anytime anyone talks about like the rape of Berlin, the way that it's propagandized. And I find it interesting that like for that they use this like horrific rendering of like a drawing, and like of course the Soviet is depicted as a very like, I don't know, like ogreish looking man. Like he's not, he doesn't look very human. Like he's made to look crazed and inhuman, and then there's emphasis on the purity of the woman in white screaming, right? And then I was looking at the Soviet posters depicting similar things, because also being directly on the front, the Soviets faced mass casualties and atrocities and rape, and that's very well documented and photographed as well, not very talked about in English. And I found a poster by Victor Denny, who's a very famous poster artist. You've definitely seen his work. He's responsible for like the old Soviet Chad meme, basically, that happened. But he did a poster piece of a also very animalistic looking Nazi soldier drooling over this dead woman with being hung with her breast chopped off, which is a real account that happened of the Soviet partisan Zoya Kosmodomskaya. I can never say her last name, who was an 18-year-old Soviet partisan who was beaten, tortured, sexually assaulted. And she had very, very famous last words of, "Comrades, why are you looking so sad? Be brave, beat the Germans, burn them. I'm not afraid to die. It's a happiness to die for one's people. And you hang me now, but I'm not alone. There are 200 million of us. You can't hang us all. They will avenge me." Wow. But there's very famous photographs of her, like I think it's like in the snow with the rope still on her neck, her breasts bare, and one of them chopped off. That happened after the fact. And so it's interesting how like it reminds me of like the Palestinian plight, how it's so well documented, all the like atrocities that are happening, and yet no one knows about this poster. This poster is relatively obscure. I don't see it in any like Western collections. You have to really specifically search for it. Yet the poster of a fictional Soviet man groping this pure woman in white is massively plastered on any article or book talking about the rape of Berlin. And so I just think it's really important to like consider these things, why things are translated and pushed, and then the comparison of like photographic evidence in comparison.
I just want to interject on one thing. This absolute hero that we have, Kosmodomskaya, she had a monument in the city of Chernihiv or Chernihiv in Ukraine, and it had stood there for decades now. But on April 2022, can you guess what happened to that statue?
They took it down.
Yeah, they took it down, and they renamed it after some fucking another person of very questionable political beliefs. Let's just put it that way, as is very typical. Christ. But yeah, sorry, go on. I just want to interject on that point.
No, I mean actually, I didn't know that statue was also taken out. I'm not surprised. But it's like, what problem could you have with this story? I suppose there are people who will always have claimed with her, and will probably claim with what's going on right now, that these stories were propagandized and not completely true and made to make someone look worse. But it's like these are particular stories where you have so much like photographic and personal like evidence of people who were there because it was done publicly. And yet you still have people claiming it can't possibly be true because the enemy did it. Your perceived ever enemy has done it. So, or it you know what I meant.
Yeah. No, exactly right. Could you please elaborate on one thing? The general approach towards dehumanizing these quote unquote Oriental men, and how they're kind of like almost their humanity is torn out of them. And there's not only, by the way, of course you have the character that is Hamas, what they imagine these people to be like, the men that represent that movement. But on the other side, you also have people who are like nurses and doctors and like regular people. And these two, they're like painted with this brush of like the Hamas mist. They're sprayed with it, right? Could you please tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think recently, again, more. I hate to be referencing tweets, but we're really in that's the reality we live in. There's that tweet that's been going around, and it's been on Instagram as well, of like the doctors at what is the Al Auda hospital in Gaza that are singing with smiles because like they're not going to leave the hospital and I think that really struck a chord with people, kind of realizing that they've been viewing men from this region in a very propagandized light. Someone said the way Muslim men have been demonized and made to look barbaric, like all they want is to kill and rape your women. Since the unrest in Gaza, I have seen medics hug shell-shocked babies, journalists letting kids put makeup on them just to make them smile, use only their hands to dig strangers out of rubble, look at their tired but smiling faces, and commit to unlearning tropes that have been touted by every media outlet. I've seen another post that's been making its rounds. It's like this like paragraph of being frustrated that we only hear like women and children, like the innocent women and children, when it's like Palestinian men are literally fasting so that their families can eat and drink with what little they have. They're the ones digging through the rubble to find their neighbors. Like they're equally deserving of our respect and compassion and are totally left out of the narrative. But again, like this is not something new. Like we have seen the demonization of Arab and Muslim men since forever, right? Especially since 9/11, unfortunately. And what I find really interesting, like from the sort of narratives that get pushed onto Muslims especially, is that it's always one extreme or the other. Either Muslims are seen as extreme, like prudes, like they're not allowed to look at each other. They are forced to cover themselves. All these like super like tropes of being extremely sexually repressed, or it's on the other end of the spectrum where they're all just sexual deviants and perverts and rape and take and use. And I found that particularly interesting. And like I've been Muslim for 10 years and I have a very unique perspective of being a Muslim American in the United States, but I'm definitely interested in what Hakeem has to say about that sort of trope and how you've seen it portrayed and how it might even affect you. I'm very curious about your perspective on that because I have a very unique American Muslim perspective.
Yeah, it's very ridiculous, I would say. It is generally like a I don't know, like 1930s, uninformed American B-movie type of like image of what interactions between the sexes are and what is allowed, what isn't, what is socially accepted and all that. But it is more or less, it is on some cases far more open and in other cases more closed. And it's in line with a certain cultural tradition that has existed for centuries, if not over 1,000 years. Of course, these things have changed from time to time. But the idea of the sexual repression idea is completely misplaced and incorrect. I think these quote unquote traditional cultures, quote unquote, don't have the issue where like what is in the US, where 35% of men don't have any partner and have absolutely no sorts of intimacy, whether sexual or otherwise, have no access to any sort of like emotional intimacy even. This is not something that exists in these societies, amongst many other examples.
There's lots that we could say when people try to accuse Islam of being a certain way. Like, there's punishment for rape that really it ranges on like the circumstances, but it could be being stoned to death, like the amputation of the limb that was used to rape, right? Like the hand, whatever.
All based.
Whipping, imprisonment, like banishment, like banishment and like fines, like having to pay the person who went through this. And then, we also have, so there's that misunderstanding. There's lots of people who think like, oh, you're just like allowed to rape in Islam, aren't you? Which is so crazy. Again, that goes back to the lack of education and the years of propaganda. There's a lot of people who believe that this sort of like prudishness is more of a colonized like result, that like it came more so from like the West, when in reality there's like a long history of openness and talking about sex and sexual relations, and there's many hadith, about people coming to the Prophet, peace be upon him, and being allowed to openly discuss and ask questions of a sexual nature, men and women. And I know there's a really, really famous hadith, and like, please correct me because I am going off of the translations that I have heard. I'm sure Arabic is very specific, but one hadith that I hear maybe like once every couple of months, I don't know why my like imams here love to use it, is about the prostitute that was forgiven for all of her sins because she gave a thirsty dog water.
Yeah.
Right. A dog was dying of thirst. She saw him, and some say that it was like she forgone her own thirst. Like she was also thirsty, but decided to give the dog water. Sometimes that's not mentioned. And it's an interesting hadith that is used a lot in these sorts of discussions, because the fact that she was apparently a prostitute isn't the point, right? Like it doesn't matter. Her past, her sins, her sexual activity, it does not matter, because she was a kind person who gave a dog water. And so it's interesting that we have like this view of Islam as being like violent towards people or judgmental towards sexuality, when we have these traditions in our faith that really are open-minded about these sorts of realities of sex and closeness, and of course center more so on one's intention and what was in their hearts. And I think when you have that juxtaposition shown to you or discussed with you, it can really help people understand the reality of our faith, right? I don't know, hopefully that makes sense. But these are the kinds of things that come up when I hear these misplaced accusations towards Muslims. I even saw another tweet, of course, upset about this video where this man was helping a woman who normally wears hijab cover her head with like his t-shirt, because like her house was bombed. She wasn't wearing it because she was in her home and she wanted to be covered. And there's so many men and women angry at this man for comforting her and helping her cover her head, because that's what she wanted to do, like give her the comfort that she wants. And it all stems down to these discussions in the comments, of course, of how awful and sexually repressive or deviant, whichever it is at the time, Islam is, and trying to find fault in the way that women are treated. Even if he's doing something like respecting what she wants and her privacy, it's still viewed in the Western lens of being something deviant and controlling and evil. Even I get that. I get comments a lot of people who assume because I somehow look down on people who don't. I literally don't care what people wear, right? But people have these very visceral reactions to the concept of what a Muslim does and looks like, and it always teeters from being super repressed or too sexual in some way. And that, of course, plays into all this propaganda we're seeing of rape apparently happening in mass.
And the complex, like the again, it's the usual intersection of Orientalism, various strands of racism, of course, complete ignorance of the culture and the details of the area that they're analyzing or commenting on. But all of this, like to bring kind of center it back to the original conversation, is all of this kind of flows neatly into the like the Zionist propaganda box, right? Which from that spot emanates essentially the American media narrative, which then is spread and then eaten up by all the other major news networks for the most part. Uncritically, of course, no digestion of the ideology, no fact checking for sure. It's completely like mass reproduced, and as a result, you have these incorrect perspectives based on incorrect presumptions kind of turned into quote-unquote common knowledge. But on the other hand, which is even more, I guess the silver lining to this is people have seemingly been seeing through this enough, at least, to realize that, hey, maybe we shouldn't be listening to this particular perspective. Maybe there is another side to this, potentially. And it's exciting to see that people are actively, questioning it. At least, I don't think this is only my circle's thing of things. Even in fairly, like, places where I don't expect to see this, particularly online, that's what I mean. Places where I don't expect to see this, I see the questioning happening. We had
a massive march in Dallas, Texas, the other day for Palestine. That, to me, 5 years ago, unthinkable. And it shows what a monumental sea change has been happening just over the last few weeks. It's incredible.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think the more we see this atrocity, like, propaganda coming up, the more, particularly from that side, the more we're going to realize, hey, you know what, if unlike, like, it's, again, very telling that the legal occupation has to make up all this shit or use, like, 3D renders or, like, drawings and all that stuff. Meanwhile, all the Palestinians have to do is turn on a fucking phone camera, and then the whole world knows, right? There's a clear, who is the one telling the truth on this, who's the one who's actively being oppressed, who's the ones being targeted and being currently ethnically cleansed, versus the other side, who's the perpetrator of that.
Which is, of course, why the electricity was cut, so they couldn't, people couldn't communicate, couldn't charge their phones, couldn't capture this information. That's why journalists are being targeted, so they can't get this information out. And it hasn't worked, thankfully. It hasn't worked.
And it won't work because the truth emerges above falsehood always. Just like apartheid South Africa, this is just a trend. Whether it will be peaceful or bloody, however it may end up, we'll slowly but surely march into the dream that is a pluralistic and democratic Palestine, which allows for equal rights for all, so that this historically beautiful, ancient, multicultural, multi-faith, multi-community society will return to being exactly what that was. People of all sorts of descents and faiths intermixing and living side by side in a way that had been basically the nature of this land, at least for the past 1,000 years, from 1198, 1196 or so, until 1947, 1948.
Very well said. And that's a perspective you will never hear from the supporters of the illegal military occupation. They do not want that. And that, I think, it should tell you everything you need to know. Like, pick a side. You do have to. And I think it's clear which one you need to pick.
Yeah, exactly right. And we have, as Muslims and as believing people, alhamdulillah, we say that we have tawakkul in God, and tawakkul is there's a very nice hadith which basically goes along the lines of Bedouin walks up to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he asks him, should I have the concept of tawakkul is essentially having faith in God that things will work out according to God's plan, essentially, right? Especially when you hope for the best for yourself and you ask God for the outcome that you'd like. And the Bedouin comes up to the Prophet and he asks him, should I just have tawakkul? Should I just have faith in God that things will work out the way that I want when I'm in the desert and I am, like, on my camel or whatever? Or should I also, should I tie my camel to make sure that he stays beside me? Or should I have faith that he will stay beside me and I don't tie him and, because he might wander into the desert and he'll never see him again? And the Prophet said both. He's like, have tawakkul and tie your camel, right? So have your faith in God, but also tie your camel. And this is kind of the parallel that we have as leftists as well, is that we need to lay the groundwork organizationally in the the fight to the propaganda war as well, amplify voices that need to be heard, as well as have undying faith in the emergence and the victory of the truth over falsehood.
Right, I think you just taught the audience some Muslim lingo, because people just say that, just say tie your camel. It's like a thing that Muslims just say to each other, tie your camel. So
exactly.
So I agree, tie your camel, and I have so much hope that the fact that people are seeing this reality, like you said, their minds are changing, they're opening to the reality. There's also because like what they're faced with is just ridiculous accusations. But I hope this has a bigger effect and triggers people to not just be suspicious of propaganda coming out of Israel and empathizing with the Palestinian people, but hopefully this also expands into other things. Of course, selfishly, I hope this also helps people think, if this is all lies about the Palestinians, maybe they lied about the Soviets too, or maybe they lied about communism too. I think this can really have a domino effect on people realizing that they've been lied to, and there's so much misunderstanding and misinformation out there, and hopefully it ignites a sort of eagerness to learn those other perspectives and realities.
Yeah, exactly right. Beautifully said. I think with this we can wrap up for today. There's been a lot discussed, a lot of very heavy things discussed. But these things are necessary to discuss. And with what better guest to have than you, Izdihar? So thank you for coming on. please, could you remind everybody where they can find you, where they can reach out to you, how they can support you?
Yeah, you can find me on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, all under Lady Izdihar or the Lady Izdihar on TikTok. And you can visit my website, which is just ladyizdihar.com, where there's a massive personal archive of scanned documents that you can look at for free. I also have a Patreon if you want to support me that way, because, you know, these perspectives are not well received and funded by institutions and things online.
We don't have $50 million of Breitbart money, sadly. Is Breitbart?
Yeah.
Alas.
the fuck it's called?
Breitbart, yeah. Yeah.
We'd like to extend our gratitude and thanks to all the people who support us, all the people who listen to us, of course, those who support us on Patreon, as well as those who support us by buying merch and whatever else. Just listening to this is warms our fuzzy little hearts. It's I want you to imagine JT in fuzzy socks. You don't need to imagine it with other clothes, by the way. But I'm sorry. But that's the feeling I get in my heart, at least. A JT with fuzzy socks because of your sword. So we really thank you for that. And with all that being said, this has been the Deprogram. I'm Hakeem.
I'm JT.
And I'm Izdihar. Tie your camel.
Exactly right.